Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Hello, I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story.
Sharing the human experience.
Through the art and craft of words, just conversations with perhaps some intent and some meaning and some format and all the things that happen when you structure a message for folks. We have brought this show to you for the last couple of years, and our format is that we kind of talk about storytelling, and then we have a wonderful guest storyteller. And today we have a real special person. She's famous, right?
She's famous. She's one of a kind, and she's hard to get a hold of because she has a day job.
Right, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, and we'll hold you in suspense. But Kate, we've had a pretty interesting early summer of storytelling, haven't we?
Oh, yes. We went to Cincinnati.
We did go to Cincinnati, which is the home of the National Storytelling Network annual conference.
Well, this year
This
year. It moves around. Next year it'll be in Richmond, Virginia.
And that was like 4 days of storytelling workshops and performances and connections and wonder. And it was just great. And now, you had a special thing happen to you during that time, because you're involved in a national project, aren't you?
Right. Well, a project based in Chicago called Just Stories. They've had 9 storytelling festivals in Chicago. It's run by Susan O'Halloran, Antonio Sacre, and Charlotte Blake Alston. But now they're doing an online one that will be August 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And I was one of the 40 tellers that were taped telling a story. Their purpose in their consortium of storytellers is to build bridges between the races.
Wow. So let me get this straight. On the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of August, you can go to
facebook.com/juststories.
Just Stories, and you can have access to even a bigger amount of storytelling than we had at the national conference?
Oh, yes.
How about that? And you don't have to leave your own computer nook or wherever you look at the computer. Holy crow. And you know, the only thing about that is if I see a storyteller and I have questions, because I always have questions, and can you work that out too?
Yes, Joe. We talked about this beforehand, but he's so clever about this. Yes, every hour there will be a new video posted on the Facebook page, and then the storyteller will be available for an online chat.
That's great. So you get the kind of editorial comments and learning about the art and the source of the story, and you get the real thing virtually live.
And you can also share, well, your story, you know, so often, you know, you tell a story and somebody will come up to you, well, that story reminded me of, and so
now Kate, at the risk of being flagrantly promotional, is there another source in the Capital District that's kind of like that, but maybe without the interactive stuff at the end?
Okay, we're doing our slides in a new order this week.
Well, no, I just want you to know that as a group of local storytellers, which is, we're the folks that bring you this show, we've got a great website because we have a super webmaster. And we take the guest clips from this show and we put them up on
YouTube. And I've organized them on our own website, storycircle at proctors.org/YouTube, so that if you're in the mood for humorous stories or personal stories or folk tales or literary stories, you can browse in those categories. So we have now 71 videos up.
And they introduce you to the members of our local Story Circle Guild, which is another way of saying if someone ever says, hey, what's storytelling all about? Or I'd be interested in having a storyteller come and tell stories that are Irish, then bingo, you can go right to the website and say, just check that out.
Could I borrow your pen for a moment?
You can borrow my pen for a moment.
Thank you. I want to remember to put a slide on the just storytelling information, just stories, so that we'll have seen them already. Oh, this is sort of time travel-y.
That's right. That's right. So there's been a fair amount of activity nationally, really on the production end. And Kate and I got a chance to meet a lot of other people and see some really great storytellers and to get some ideas that we'll bring back to the show, to the story Sundays at the Mansion and at Proctor's and other places. So we're going to go.
One of my takeaways that I wanted to share because it touched me so, to introduce her story, Carol Birch, a wonderful storyteller from Connecticut, said, "We know that laughter is contagious, and fear is too, but so are courage and compassion." And here's a story about that.
Wow.
And she told the story of Luba, the angel at Bergen-Belsen, who during the last month of World War II saved 54 children. And she convinced they had been left out to die of exposure. And she heard them crying in the middle of the night, and she couldn't leave them there. She didn't know what had happened to her son, but she knew these were somebody's children. And so she brought them into her barracks and convinced the terrified women there that yes, they could hide them, yes, they could feed them. And she was a nurse, and she had sort of the run of the concentration camp. And not many of the guards realized that she was Jewish. They thought that she was a political prisoner, and that gave her a little more leeway. She kept her sleeve down always so they couldn't see her tattoo. So it's a wonderful story. But I love that, remember, courage and compassion are contagious.
And one of the things about storytelling is that even without the whole story, you get transported to places that you couldn't travel in the same way, just in the anecdote about a story. And I'll remember that opening line, and we should have Carol Birch come over and tell sometime, I think.
Oh, we should be so lucky.
We should be well, we're very fortunate here in the Capital District. And we're very fortunate here in the Capital District today to welcome Karen Pillsworth. Karen is a storyteller from Kingston, New York. That's a suburb of the Capital District down south. Well, maybe not a suburb. All right. It's a wonderful small city on the banks of a great estuary river that has a lot of character and charm, and much of that character and charm is expressed in Karen Pillsworth, at least for me, because she's the only person from Kingston that I think I really have ever known. So there you go. Well, actually, I can now think of 3 other people, but they don't have your character or your charm. There you go. And Karen's here at our invitation because this is a summertime and she can get away. She's a Montessori teacher, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And you're also a wife and a mom and a grandmom, and I have only really known you as a storyteller. And so I'm wondering, just when did it happen that you became a storyteller, or were you kind of always a storyteller?
I knew that you would ask that question.
Oh, she's psychic.
She's psychic too.
Ooh.
We like that in our guest.
And you know, I did really think about it a while, and I thought, I think I didn't know I was a storyteller until I became one. I always loved stories, and I always attribute my beginning storytelling to my undergraduate work at St. Rose here in Albany. I had a wonderful oral interpretation teacher, and she, you know, we took the whole course, my friends and I, and there was always a faculty night. And she said, all right, now we will be performing for faculty night, and Maureen, you will do Shakespeare, and Suzanne, you will do Chaucer, and Karen, you'll be doing Winnie the Pooh. And I said, no, really, what will I be doing? And she said, no, I think we should always have a representation of a children's story. And so I performed Winnie the Pooh for the faculty at St. Rose. And, you know, I was pretty comfortable. And I thought, this is okay, I can do this. And then I think I was lucky that I fell into storytelling in different places. We moved 13 times in 13 years in different states, and I was lucky to find wonderful libraries who needed people to tell, or in the beginning to read stories and then to tell. And then I worked with a troupe in New Orleans, which I would never do again. I like going solo. But this was the Good Fairies of Hullen Ridge. And you had to wear the little fairy costume and the little crown. And first you had to audition. And then you had to have an apprenticeship of 3 months, at which time you were called a FIT, a fairy in training. And then after 3 months, you would get your wand. And I thought, really, this is so not anything I like to do. But it was another great experience, and taught me about being in front of different audiences and different venues. So
you're a legitimate fairy.
Yeah, I don't advertise that on my website.
Okay. Just, I've done some work in advocating for gays and things like that. So
I saw your article in the paper.
If I can help you in any way, let me know. That's a great story in and of itself, that you kind of moved around, and when you got to Kingston, is that when you began to kind of...
Well, you came back to Kingston.
I came back. I was raised in Kingston, very lucky, a great place to be raised, a good town to be raised in. And then we did move with jobs, and then we ended up coming back to Kingston. And when I came back, and it's all timing. I mean, it's amazing to think about it, because I don't often. There was a person, Tracy Levitt, a wonderful storyteller, who said, I think we should start a storytelling organization. And she had this little event, and she said, how many people want to be part of it? And we kind of raised our hands, and she collected $20. And that was the beginning of the Vision Story and Art Center. And I met Lorraine Hart and Gilardi, and she and I have been telling together now. We have a little production company called Tall Tale Short Story Productions. She's the tall tale. I would be the short story. And, it kind of happened from there. But coming back to Kingston, I wouldn't think would have been the best thing for me in storytelling. And it was. It was great. So then I've carried on from there.
Now, a couple of other things. You're the storytelling laureate of Kingston. And I got to tell you, you're the only storytelling laureate that we know. We've just never crossed trails with another storytelling laureate. And that's an honor, but how did that happen?
Well, you have to know the mayor.
Have to know the mayor. That's our problem. We don't know any mayors.
When I talk about being storyteller laureate, and I do give a workshop about it, I say I think that it is hard for many tellers because not every teller likes to be political. That's not a place that some artists find a comfort zone. But if you really are going to advocate for yourself into this position, then you do have to be a little political. And so I did grow up with the mayor, and I did go to school with him, and I would tease him incessantly about what this city really needs is a storyteller laureate. And he was a great supporter of the arts, but I have to tell you, this was the first story I remember about him. Every year we have a biennial art exhibit outdoors. And before he was mayor and he was the alderman at large, he was driving down Broadway and he looked up the cobblestone hill. And coming down the hill there was a broken lawnmower and a broken toaster and a toaster oven and all this stuff. And he got on the phone and he called up the DPW and he said, "We're having people come for an art show, and get this crap off. What is this?" And very quietly the man on the other end of the phone said, "That's part of the exhibit. Just look down at the little sign at the bottom of the hill." So we always tease him that really he's an art advocate, but he doesn't always know the art. So he was very supportive though, and he said, "Well, that sounds like a good idea." And I kind of said that for a few years, and then in 2002, for my birthday, I was given the honor of having a Karen Pillsworth Day.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was my very own day, and he named me Storyteller Laureate, which, he said, in the proclamation, it said wonderful things, and I am humbled by it, but he said, your stories entertain not only children and people, but you're always there for, you do the program for the homeless children, so you bring a vision and a look to the people who need the face of the stories. And so, we want to honor you with this. And luckily for me, because he is no longer mayor now, he put right in there in perpetuity. So even though I don't really think that's a good idea, because I really do advocate for communities having their own storyteller laureates, and I certainly would love to see state and national storyteller laureates. For me, it's fun because the new mayor can't really kick me out.
But you also know the Kingston history. You share those kinds of stories.
I do. I do love history, and I loved growing up in Kingston. And my father was in local politics, and I felt like I was embedded in the city. And so there were times when I spoke occasionally for the mayor if he wasn't there, or spoke to issues like when we were talking about the library tax. And we needed to do things, as we all do, to keep everything going. And so he said, would you come and tell a story before the Common Council? And I did. I told a story, a Patricia Polacco story about the library. And I really think, obviously, they had their vote already set in their minds. But I like to think perhaps I changed one or two minds, and they voted for it. And
or they went, yeah, I was going to do that, but now I really know why.
Yeah. And, so I did have those opportunities as well, which was really nice.
Well, we're a quarter way through our program, and we've talked a lot about stories, but we'll get back to like what happens early in September, other than your birthday, in a little bit. But would you tell us a story?
I would love to tell a story. And I'd like to say before I do that I so enjoy telling stories to children, and that's how I started. But as of late, more and more, I do love telling stories to grown-ups. And so I'm going to tell a story that I think that you might have heard already, but not everybody. So I'll tell this story. Growing up, I lived in a very lovely middle-class home. And my parents saved and saved their money to buy that house. And it was really a home. I mean, from the moment we walked in the door, it wasn't just a house. But my parents didn't have a lot of money. We were working class people. And so the furnishing in that house was pretty much good, solid, used furniture. And it was great because, nobody was yelling at you to not spill things or whatever, because it was already loved and well used. And it didn't have plastic on it like my Italian aunts used to have on the furniture, But it was good furniture. But I have to ask a question, because it has to do with my house. Do you know the difference between an empty chair and an extra chair? And I think if people think about it, they do, but I'll tell you. An empty chair carries with it just a little bit of sadness, because it's a chair where somebody once sat, but they don't anymore. Now, sometimes it's a short-time sadness. It could be the first time you have a child go off to summer camp, and you sit at the dinner table and you look at that empty chair and you think about when the call is going to come in the middle of the night, because they're not going to be able to make it and stay overnight. But you miss them because their face is not staring at you from that chair. It could be the chair where your high school students sat and now they've gone off to college. And even though they promise when they come home in the summer they'll be around, it's never the same again. Or maybe you have a child who has grown up and gotten married and has started a home of their own. It could be close by, but it might be far away. And when they come back, they barely get to sit in that chair. They're so busy. Or maybe a grandparent sat in that chair and they're no longer with you. So that chair has a little bit of sadness in it. But an extra chair opens up the whole world, and I'll tell you why. In our house of the furniture that was not brand new, my mother did one year, I distinctly remember, have her eye on a dining room set. Now, I can remember she came home and she told us all about it, and she said she really wanted it, but there wasn't money for a new dining room set. Today, you might go out with your credit card and say, I'll worry about paying it off. But now my parents had a credit card, but it was only for emergencies. We had a perfectly good functional dining room table, and my parents were not going to use a credit card. So my mother put yet another coffee can on top of the refrigerator. They were marked with all different things, and this one was marked dining room set. And whenever there was a bit of extra money, she would put it in the coffee can. And it took a long time to save. And when she finally had the money, I know that I was worried as the oldest child that that dining room set was not going to be there anymore. I mean, it was a long time since she had looked at it. But I remember her coming home and saying, it's going to be delivered on Friday. Now, Thursday, she emptied everything out of that room. There was just the rug, and she waited Friday morning, and I can still see her face as they carried in the furniture. There was a corner cabinet and a hutch, a table with 2 leaves and 6 chairs. And for a while, she really just stood and stared at it. And then she put her very best tablecloth on it, and in the middle, she put the flowers that my father had sent. My father sent my mother flowers for every occasion, every holiday, Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, Easter, and somehow he knew this was going to be a special occasion, and the flowers had arrived before the table. That night, she prepared dinner, and we came in to sit. And this probably happens at your house, and maybe you don't even think about it, but that night when we sat down, my mother sat at one end of the table and my father at the other. My brother sat over here, and my sister and I sat across from him. And so next to him there was an extra chair. Now, nobody told us every night that we had assigned seats, but you always sit in the same seats. Those are your seats at the dining room table. So it was always that there was an extra chair. And that's when I knew how special it was. Because the people that sat in their chair, they took me everywhere. The first people that came and sat in that chair were the neighbors who wanted to see the new dining room set. And they would sit down in the chair, and I would be sitting in the other room, and it was there that I learned about gossip. Now, gossip is an important thing. Some people don't think so, but you should learn about gossip when you're young. There I learned that gossip means that some of the things that people are saying are true. Some of them half true. Some of them have no basis in reality whatsoever. But it's important to know that. Sometimes the people that sat in that chair were the people who were my father's political friends. I learned about how I was going to be canvassing the ward for signatures and putting up lawn signs and all of that. And I listened and I learned about politics. And I learned that politics is kind of like gossip. Some of it is true, some of it is partially true, and some of it has no basis in reality whatsoever. It's important to know that. Sometimes it would be our friends who were over for dinner who would sit in that chair. And I remember when my friend Jean Marie was over, the bowl of potatoes got to her and she just stood there and held it. And my mother looked at her and she said, Jean Marie, in our house you don't have to eat something if you don't like it. And she looked at the bowl and she said, no, I have 14 brothers and sisters. And when the bowl of potatoes gets to me, it's always empty. And we realized how lucky we were that there was always more food on our table. Every once in a while, one of my mother's friends from the Bronx would stop by and tell stories about the old neighborhood, and I am sure those were stories my parents didn't even want us to hear about. And every once in a while, some of the oldest relatives would sit there and talk about how our relatives came from Ireland and from Italy. So that chair took me places I would never have gotten to go. And it introduced me to people and characters I would have never met if I lived to be 200. So I loved that extra chair. Now, when my dad passed away, my mom decided she'd sell the house, and she said only one thing to us. She said, when we look for an apartment, could we please find a place where I can take my dining room table? And of course we did, and it was kind of squished in. But still, if you went to that apartment, that chair that I knew was the extra chair was usually filled with someone, and I would still love to hear their stories. And then when she passed away, and my brother and sister and I cleaned everything out, we stood looking at that dining room set. And we knew that we couldn't give it away. But none of us needed it, or wanted it, or really had room for it. So we decided that it would go where all good furniture goes during its transition period, into my garage. I believe that only 1 year did a car ever live in our garage. Other than that, it has always just been a holding station for things coming and going. And for months, I couldn't go in the garage. I couldn't look at the dining room set. And then one day I opened the door and I went in, and I think many of us don't know where ideas come from, but I looked and I said, I know what to do. I took the chairs to my friend Becky, who paints, and I said, please paint these chairs this shade of green. Green was my mom's favorite color. And put a few flowers on each, not too many. She wouldn't like a lot. And then on the back of each chair, I told her what to paint. On one it said, "To Johnny, love Mom." On another, "To Mary, love Mom." And the remaining 4 had each of her grandchildren's names, and love Grandma. And over the course of the next few months, I gave to my brother and sister, my son, my daughter, and my niece and my nephew 1 chair. And I said to them, "Nothing you have in your homes will ever match this chair. But I promise you, if you put it in an inviting place, people will come and they will sit in that chair and they will take you to places you've never been before and introduce you to people you might never have met, all because you have an extra chair." Now the table, that's another story. And that's the empty chair.
Man, oh man.
The empty or the extra chair?
The extra chair.
Okay.
Extra. I'm enthralled. I was enthralled from the very first moment, and I found that I was traveling to other dining rooms, other special chairs, so that the story does a lot. For me, it met that test of taking the listener someplace beyond your story. Now that doesn't say that your story wasn't anything, but it was so evocative.
It had a universality to it.
Yeah, and now, and when you began to develop that story, or did it? When did you first tell that story? I guess that's a good question to kind of say. When do you take something that's part of your memory and your tradition and your very soul, and decide that it's going to be something you're going to share as a story?
My mom has been gone 3 years, and I told that story for the first time last year.
Last year.
So it took me 2 years to be able to share that story without crying or without feeling, hoping that other people have the emotion that I have in the story. But I remember someone telling me, if you cry during your story, it's your therapy. But if other people in your audience feel the emotions of your story, then that's a good story. It's okay to take them to places where they're happy and places where they're sad and places where they're remembering. But I couldn't have told that story the year after my mom was gone. That wasn't, where that story was. And for most times when I'm developing a story, I have to say, finding stories always come to me as gifts. People will say to me, "You have to tell this story," or "This folktale, you need to work on this folktale." But the stories that I write and the personal stories that I tell come to me always when I'm in the car. I'm always in the car, so that's when they happen. And I'll think about a story and I'll start talking to myself out loud, and then I'll write down a little note when I get home, and then it'll just sit there. And it takes a while, but I don't have all the stories written down. I have a lot of the stories that are still in my head, and now that I am a grandmother, so many of my friends have said, "Karen, really? You're not going to be around forever, and you need to get them written down, get them recorded." But for a long time, and usually the first time I tell the story, it's not anywhere but my head, which is a dangerous thing. But I always remember that I had gone to see an author's group, and one of the authors there said, "I always do my editing in my head, because I don't like the process of rewriting, the physical process of rewriting. And so I probably get to the final draft before I put it on the paper and then tell it." And so I think for me, that process is true, that I edit in my head over and over. I might tell it to a friend, but it doesn't really hit the paper for a long time. And then they come to me in the car, pretty much, when I'm just driving along.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because we all have our different quirks of things. I generally don't write down stories until I've told them a couple of times, and it's more for the archive than for the reference than for anything else, because I find that I don't read them and I don't memorize them because I can't, but it's more for the record. And I think the other element is that when I've recorded stuff, I sometimes get embarrassed by how I use the language because it's not really what I thought I was going to say. So I find that's difficult. This show, by the way, since we've been used to doing it, I think we tend to be a lot more conversational here than we would be in a performance. Maybe yes, maybe no.
When we're conversing, we
Right.
converse, but when we tell a story,
I don't know. At any rate, that's another topic. But that was a great story, and can you give us a little postscript? And this is kind of maybe an addition, but when you gave the chair to one of the grandkids, or just describe one of those.
My obviously my brother and sister have known my mom and dad
Right.
much longer, and they were very moved by the chair and were happy to add it to their homes. The kids, though, really had more emotion. I was really surprised. They looked at it and it was like, yeah, this was Grandma's. I sat in this chair. I go, well, one of these chairs. I'm not sure it was that one, but yeah, you're right. You probably did sit in all of them. And they, my own children have their own homes now because they're older. My nephew is a Marine and now has his own home. My niece still lives with her parents, with my brother and his wife. So her chair sits in her bedroom. But I've been to the places, and they're all there. Mm-hmm. And they are the extra chair, and they're in a place where you can go and sit. And so they just welcomed it, and it was something that draws us together, that we each have that piece. And I do have the table, and I haven't done anything with it yet, but we'll have to wait for another story.
its time will come. It's still in that transition stage. Mm-hmm. It's bigger than the chair, so it's harder to find a new home or a new use. So yeah,
it will happen. It will happen.
Yeah.
I did want to go back and just say one thing about learning the stories, though. That we have a joke. My friends have a joke that I can never sell my car because it's 12 years old and it still has a cassette player in it. And one of the things I do before I even write it down, is I usually say the story into a cassette, and that way, like you said, sometimes you hear yourself and you go, I didn't really mean to say that way, or there could be a better word, or maybe I should edit that out when I say that. So I listen to myself to help me learn the stories and also to help me edit the stories. But I don't think I can buy a new car with a cassette player in it, so the Honda's just going to have to last at least it's at 194,000, so I think we can keep going.
Well, we have a 1990 Volvo at 240.
Yeah, it's got a lot of miles left on it.
Yeah.
You can, buy a little recorder and transfer it to those funny little silver things that slip into a CD.
Yeah, my son keeps telling me that, but
it's contemporary. It's actually this century kind of technology as opposed to the cassette. But I understand. I just I still have a cassette player that's got some that I use for some historical material. It's okay.
It is okay, and it's good for a joke, and it's good for a story.
It is.
And when the lights go out, I have my battery-operated cassette recorder, and I can still listen to something. So.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to take a little break, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in storytelling. And Kate and I have been working hard to get ready for our upcoming season at Proctor's and at the Glenn Sanders Mansion and Telebration. And so we're excited about that. The summer, we've got some individual performances, but I'm not sure we can talk about much of the summer activity.
Well, except for Not Just for Kids storytelling series.
That's right,
out of Schoharie. That it's started on, I don't know when you're hearing this, but it is or has started on July 29th. These are all at Sundays at 6 p.m. at the Schoharie Crossing State Historic Site. Claire Nolan is the first teller, Tall Tales and True in the Mohawk Valley. Excuse me. I have a frog in my throat. I know you're partial to frogs, but it seemed to have jumped into my throat. And Willie Claflin's coming all the way from California with Maynard the Moose, a very wise moose. Flying Moose and Alien Lobsters, Tales from a Parallel Universe. And then Motoko, wonderful storyteller and a friend of ours from Andover, Massachusetts. Concubines, Pickpockets, and Ghosts. The Hidden Face of Japan.
Ooh.
Then Bill Lepp will be there, who's won the West Virginia Liars Contest many times. Warning Lights, Bright Ideas Gone Bad. And the Story Crafters will be there to end August. Twice Upon a Time, retakes and twists on classical folklore and balladry. They're a husband-wife duo, and they're musicians as well as storytellers.
And they're friends locally, too.
Oh, right.
From down in
And
Columbia County.
they were in the Visions Story Center.
Way back when?
Yes. And then Andy Davis from New Hampshire will be ending the series, Politicians on Brooms, Other Visions from the Quest for Truth and Beauty.
Wow. There's one. There's the title. Now, if you don't know where Schoharie Crossing is, it's a great place for a Sunday late afternoon picnic and then take in the storytelling. It's at the juncture of the Schoharie Creek and the Mohawk River. And to get there, you drive up. If you have to come from the Capital District, you can come up the thruway to the Amsterdam exit. Stay on the south side of the Mohawk River on Route 5S for about 3 miles. And as you come down the hill to cross the Schoharie Creek, there's a little sign to the right that says Fort Hunter. And if you drive into Fort Hunter and follow the signs, you'll come right to the historical headquarters of the historic site. They're getting over some injury from the floods last year. And they have discovered some interesting things. Their parking lot got taken up by the flood, and they discovered the outline and the foundation of the original Fort Hunter that was built in 1715. So they were excited about that, but you have to park someplace else.
Right, and the contract is out for it.
And there's a place for a picnic right along the Schoharie Creek, and there's exhibits about the old canal. And if you go, you'll understand a little bit why they call it Schoharie Crossing, and you can read the story of how they built an aqueduct to carry the canal across the river. Because for the first 15 years of the Erie Canal, they dragged the canal boats across that slate bottom of the Schoharie Creek. Didn't know that, did you?
Well, I didn't know that. I knew there were aqueducts other places, like in Rexford.
Right, but a lot of those weren't built when the canal opened because of the engineering problem. And if you really want the story that I think is the most interesting, when they did that 15 years later, they had to raise the level of the canal 8 feet in each direction, east-west, for 10 miles to get the water levels balanced so that the canal could go over the creek on the aqueduct. And we sometimes think that the Erie Canal was opened in 1826, engineering marvel. Well, you know, they were tweaking that canal for the next 150 years.
Yeah, they doubled the width, which meant all new locks.
And that story is all out at Schoharie Crossing. So the storytelling is a great place. It's a beautiful little site for a picnic.
And they've been doing this for, I think, over 15 years. So it's amazing.
And if you bring a canoe or a kayak, you can drop it right in.
Yeah, first when you were saying where the Schoharie Creek meets the Mohawk, going, Joe, people won't be coming by boat. But then,
Well, you
but then
never
you went
know.
right on to the
You never know. You never know how you're
roads.
going to get there. I've been there in a boat, and I've been there in a car.
Okay, now at the beginning of September in Kingston, what do we have there, Karen?
Oh, we have the Huli on the Hudson, indeed, that we do.
Indeed, and the huli is a what? It's, if you don't mind telling us.
It's a grand party.
It's a grand party.
We every year the Ancient Order of Hibernians sponsors a day. It's the Huli on the Hudson. It is, oh my gosh, I believe it's the second. It's the Sunday before Labor Day. And a few years back now, they asked if I would be interested in doing a spoken word stage. So they didn't have it the first year, and then after that, we have had every year. I think some of you might have been there.
I've been there.
And we have 4 tellers, and my theory about the stage is that it should start not right after the opening ceremonies, so you have time to walk around a little bit. And it should end before the big bands come on at night so the tellers can enjoy them. So we're kind of packed in the middle between 1:30 and 6 o'clock. And this year we're going to have Jim Hawkins will be there, and Janet Carter.
Oh, fun.
and Lorraine Hart-and-Gilardi and myself, and we'll be each telling for an hour. And it started because they said we need to have some more family-friendly venues. They have 2 stages of music, and it really is a family event. But I have noticed over the years that more and more adults have found their way to the tent, which of course I love. And the tellers are wonderful, and they're ready for, like all of us, whomever comes, whatever the audience is. But more and more adults are coming and filling the tent, which is nice.
And it's just a great place, and it's, you're right in downtown Kingston in the historic area that, does that have a name?
The Rondout.
The Rondout. And for those of you who haven't been there, it is just a wonderful feeling to be in the Rondout, even without all the happy people there.
And the food.
And the food and the drink and the entertainment. So plan on that if you're around on Labor Day weekend and near Kingston, or make Kingston a destination, because you can park your car or get shuttled in, because there's a big
There are
crowd.
shuttles, 3 parking lots, and we have a handicapped accessible parking lot, and we shuttle people in from there as well.
And you can meander through all the goings-on, and it is just a wonderful, uplifting end of summer.
And it's free.
That's the best part.
There are obviously vendors and food to be purchased, but the event is free. And the first year when we had it, nobody anticipated the crowds. And the first year it did rain, and we said, thank God, because it attracts up to 20,000 people. And I just have to throw this little story in. A couple of years ago, as it kept expanding and expanding, and we were losing some funding because, again, people are generous and can sponsor, but as we all know, times are difficult. So we were trying to figure out how we were going to afford more porta potties. This was a big problem. And I said,
Because happens.
yes, and especially if you're in the Guinness tent all the
Oh, I was going to say,
Oh, that happens.
It could happen. So I said, I have a great idea. I said, when I have Telebration, the one thing that I always do is I take the Telebration posters and I put them inside the bathroom doors of places, schools and things, because,
everybody goes there.
everybody goes there, and there it is, right in front of you. So I said, why don't we ask people if they want to sponsor a porta potty? And they could decorate it however they want. They could advertise their business inside and out, and we'll charge them a fee to sponsor. And 25 porta potties sold out in record time. And people would come, and I had my own Storyteller Laureate porta potty, and we decorated it. And you know what? It's been that way ever since. That it's a way that we can support. And
So you have 25 stories on the porta potties.
We have
really what you
all
have.
kinds of
All kinds
decorations.
of
yeah.
decorations. And just to think that those people in Saratoga thought about it with the horses.
Yeah.
And it could have been much more functional than God. That's a great,
I was going to ask you about that, because you had mentioned your creative marketing, crowd handling technique.
It's kind of a good bit. And if you had someone sponsor, you could actually have like the porta potty in plastic or something, so that if I was the hardware store that had sponsored the porta potty, I could have it like a bobblehead doll, so that people could then see that I was sponsoring and get extra credit for it with my customers.
You could leave a little packet with your cards. People could take the cards on the outside.
Right.
There's
On
all
the
kinds.
outside. On the outside.
On the outside, yes.
And do you give prizes for the?
Yeah, they have in the past given prizes for the best decorated
boy,
porta potty.
what a
I don't know. We should. You're not a member of the producers and organizers special interest group of the National Storytelling Network,
I'm
but
not,
I think this is an idea that should be shared.
I think we ought to put that out on an email and just kind of. So what we need, Karen, is we need a picture of the porta potty lineup that we can use to promote the promotion.
I have a picture of me coming out of my porta potty.
Oh, do you?
I do, absolutely, in my green skirt and
Maybe that would do it.
Yes.
Maybe that would do it.
Please send
I'll send it
little
your way.
write-up.
That would make you
It would
famous.
at least lighten everyone's day on the in that special
in the
interest
producer's world, that would make you famous. It doesn't take much. A porta potty will do it.
That'll do it. Okay.
Decorated porta
Happy
potty.
to share.
There we go.
group. Okay. Well.
What else is going on?
Not much that I can recall, but as always, you can help Story Circle at Proctor's and all of our activities by becoming a patron. And this website, storycircleatproctors.org, how you can help .shtml, will tell you how to do that.
And we welcome and really admire your support because we use the funds just to make up the difference between what we can raise in ticket sales and what it costs to produce some of the programs that we offer.
All arts organizations have patrons, members, because ticket sales just don't cover it. And storytellers do need to eat. And so we do like to pay them, and they need rent and all those
all that stuff,
all that other stuff. Yes, unless you're a member of the fairy troupe. But
Yeah.
Even there,
Even then, we do have to live someplace.
yes, yes.
The other thing that we try to use from some of the earnings, particularly of Telebration, is that we take the earnings from Telebration, which happens November.
The first Sunday in November this year.
First Sunday in November, at GE Theater in Proctor's. And from the surplus from that, because the tellers don't get paid for that performance, they donate their honoraria into a fund that supports performances in libraries and community outreach programs throughout the year. And over the years, we've funded
over 80.
Over 80.
80.
So another way you can support storytelling is by bringing your friends to Telebration. And we'll be having more about that as it comes to form later in the season. You've told us the story of the porta potty and the hoolie and the extra chair, and woven a lot of memories in all of that. Do you have another story for us?
We have 11 and a half minutes left. So
I have a wee story.
A wee story,
One of the things that I like to do as Storyteller Laureate is to give people a little bit of a taste of Kingston wherever I go. And I like, especially when I'm dealing with children, to say, there are other places that you might want to go to visit, and especially when I go to libraries in New York State in the summer, it's not so far. You could come to Kingston, but why would you want to come? What does Kingston have? Why would you want to go there? So when I tell to children, and sometimes adults, I often tell this story. Once, there was a piece of bubblegum named Betsy. Now, Betsy lived in a container just like this with 164 of her closest friends. And every day the lid would be taken off and little hands would reach in and pieces of bubble gum would be taken out, but it was never Betsy. And at night the lid would be put back on and Betsy would be put back up on the shelf between the Twizzlers and the M&Ms. Now, Betsy was sure that all of her friends were out in the world having excellent adventures while she was stuck here in this tub. But one day, the tub was opened, and a little girl reached in, and she took out Betsy. Betsy was so excited. She felt her wrapper being taken off. Oh, it was a little cold. She had never been outside the wrapper before. And then she was popped into the warm mouth of a little girl. Oh, said Betsy, this is what it's like to feel wanted. And Betsy loved this. So she traveled around that day with the little girl. And in the later afternoon, the mother and the little girl decided that they would go on a picnic. And they went to uptown Kingston. Kingston has an uptown, a midtown, and a downtown. And they went uptown to Forsyth Nature Center. And it was a little early for their picnic, so they put their picnic basket down on a bench. And they went over to Kinderland, the wonderful playground which the Junior League had built. And they played there, and then they went to our Forsyth Nature Center, which has just grown and become a beautiful place to visit. And they visited Isaac the Bull and 3 billy goats Scruff, and they fed the peacocks. And then they went to have their picnic. Now you know and I know, and the little girl knew, that if you have gum in your mouth and it is time to eat, that you have to take the gum out of your mouth. And the little girl knew very well that the gum should go into a garbage can. But when she looked around the park at that time in early spring, she didn't see any garbage cans. So she did something that I know none of you would ever do. When her mother wasn't looking, she took the gum out of her mouth and placed it underneath the bench. Betsy was appalled, just appalled. She looked and she thought, oh, where am I? All I can see is shoes. I see Crocs and flip-flops and sandals and sneakers, but what is my little girl going to do? And oh, she thought, I know. When my little girl is finished with her lunch, she will come back and get me. But you know that's not true. So the little girl and her mother went home, and Betsy spent a long, dark night underneath that bench. The next day, one of the maintenance workers from the park came to scrape off the old paint and get things ready for summer, and he scraped Betsy right out onto the sidewalk. Now, we all know that the sidewalk is a dangerous place for a piece of gum to be, and it was for Betsy. For that day, Mayor Satile, the mayor of Kingston, had driven up to Forsyth Nature Center for lunch, and after lunch he was walking around the zoo talking to people, and whoosh, he stepped right on Betsy. Only he didn't really know it, and he got into his Jeep and he drove down Broadway to Midtown Kingston, where our historic City Hall is, across from our high school. And he was going to go into his office, but when he got out of his Jeep, his foot kind of hit the side, and Betsy was back out on the sidewalk. And he never really got to know Betsy at all. Well, that poor Betsy stayed on that sidewalk for a while until a seagull, obviously lost, flew down and swooped up Betsy in his beak, and flew all the way down from Midtown, downtown Kingston, where we have beautiful Kingston Point Park on the Hudson River. And as, of course, he flew over the sand, he saw his other friends, his other seagulls, and we know they always have to talk to each other, squawk, 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 and Betsy fell out into the sand. This was very uncomfortable for Betsy to be covered in sand. But luckily, a squirrel came by and picked her up and put her on the table, saving her for later. Not too timely, though, for a family came and put their picnic basket down on Betsy. At the end of the day, Betsy was transported to the trunk of a car and then to a shelf in a garage where she stayed for 3 days. But 3 days later, that family decided they'd go on another picnic, and they went to Forsyth Nature Center, where Betsy had started out, and sat down on that same bench and put the picnic basket down, and when they got up, somehow Betsy ended up under that bench again. She was worried. She knew this was not a good place to be, but as she sat there and watched all those shoes going by, she looked and she said, oh, those are the shoes of my little girl. And the little girl and the mother sat down on the bench. And Betsy just sat there very quietly, of course, and the little girl sat there and she looked around and she thought to herself, I wonder if my gum is still under this bench. And then the little girl did something I know none of you would ever do. When her mother wasn't looking, she bent down, found Betsy, and popped her right back into her mouth. Now, as gross and disgusting as that is, it means that Betsy Bubblegum lives another day. And so if you ever see me again, you might hear of other places in Kingston that Betsy Bubblegum has visited, or she might even come to your hometown and visit places that you would like to tell me about. So Betsy Bubblegum is sure to have some more adventures.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it, especially that the little kid put the bubble gum back in her mouth.
There's a lot of at the end of that story, of course.
And it gives us a little insight into your very fertile brain. How did this story come to be? I assume the title is Betsy Bubblegum.
Yes.
And Bubblegum is her last name?
Yes.
All one word.
Betsy
Okay.
Bubblegum. I was actually giving a workshop, and a teacher was in the workshop, and she came with a story that had a similar kind of take to it that some children had written. And I talked to her and I said, I'd like to develop a story around that. And we talked about it. And then, I just really felt that every community has special places. Mm-hmm. And, you don't really need to know everything because that's too overwhelming. But if you know just a little tidbit, and I thought this way, children, because the children that I teach who live in Midtown, some of them have never even been down to Kingston Point Beach. When you say, where is the Hudson River? You live on the Hudson River. And of course, no, they live in their house. Right. So, this is a concept that, you want them to know. Or we can go uptown, and here we have an absolutely free nature center that offers wonderful programming. But, you have to walk up there and you have to see it. So there's there are all of these things right in Kingston, but you only need to know about a few of them to be enticed to come. And then you can come to the biennial art exhibit, or every 2 years when we burn Kingston in our historic reenactment, and you can see all the things that go on in Kingston.
Or the Hoolie on the Hudson.
Or the Hoolie on the Hudson, or Celebration.
Right.
So there are lots of reasons to come, but I like to let children know the little bits and pieces about where we are.
It's a great story, and it's a wonderful travelogue, and it's applicable in other places if people develop somebody like Betsy.
And they should have their own whatever travel in their community, like the Flat Stanley books used to be and all of that, so you can have your own character. It doesn't have to be Bubblegum, and take them to show people about the places where you live.
Wow. That was a pretty nice benediction in itself, don't you think?
Right. We only have 3 minutes left, so
3 minutes
just
left. 3 minutes left.
Oh, you did something with the Girl Scouts recently.
I did. I was very fortunate. I was approached by the Girl Scouts. They're doing a storytelling series, and they're interviewing different people. And they interviewed me as the storyteller laureate. And it will be soon on the Girl Scout website. I don't know all the information because they haven't sent it to me yet. But you'll be able to go on and see me and other people who are storytelling in different...
But we'll put a link on your website.
Yes.
I'm her webmaster, so.
Can I say one last thing?
Oh, sure.
Is that okay?
You can say.
That takes a minute. I think all of us are always, if not worried, wondering where our next story is going to come from. And so in the past couple weeks, I found out where mine is going to come. Doesn't have any development to it yet, but someone asked my daughter, what are the 3 most important things your mother taught you?
Ooh.
Now that's a little scary, because you sit there and you wonder, ooh, what could they be? 3, just 3. So she said, and she didn't even blink, she said, my mother taught me that fair is not equal. There were things my brother got, things that I got. They didn't have to be equal, but she was always fair. She taught me that every day is Earth Day. And she taught me to try to believe in replace yourself population so that we always had enough room on the earth to share.
Whoa.
So there's my next story.
Wow.
And quite a
Now,
affirmation from your daughter.
and she didn't have to think. She just kind of did it.
She just said it.
Fair is not equal.
Every day is Earth Day.
Every day is Earth Day.
And replace yourself population.
Boy, when you get that one worked up, we'll have to get you on a card with Kent Bushman, who I regard as one of my other Earth Day is every day kind of people. But that's just a wonderful story in and of itself. And I thought the Bubblegum story was a benediction.
Oh no, I have the benediction. Tell us about the piece of jewelry that your daughter gave you.
Oh, for Christmas, she gave me a necklace, and it was the year she was going to make me a grandmother for the first time. And on the front of the necklace it said, my very favorite stories begin with, and when you turn it over it says, one day my mom and I, ...
Oh, yeah. Well, we've had stories, and then we've had the kernel of story, the beginning and the end, the benediction. This has been a very memorable time for me, and I'm sure for Kate and for our guest,
Thank
Karen, and we hope for you, because without you out there listening, stories don't have the same verve, and so you're very important to this equation of advocating and sharing stories by story.
Thank you for coming today, and we hope you come back again.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning